going to talk about American abortion law. And let's talk about the case that was handed down in 1973, which was Roe versus Wade, and also on the same day, Doe v. Bolton. In Roe versus Wade, the United States Supreme Court basically decided that the word person, as it's understood in the 14th Amendment, does not apply to the unborn. That's what they decided on that day. And when the U.S. Supreme Court decided that case, they betrayed one of our most sacred principles in this country, which is found in the Declaration of Independence. It says, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that they are endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights, and among those are the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." The founders listed the right to life as the first right because they understood that it was foundational to all other rights. You have to be born to have the right to liberty. You have to be born to have the right to be happy. All the rights that we enjoy in the United States are due to the fact that we're born. So the founders put it first because they understood that it was foundational, the right to life. And the Supreme Court trampled on that prized principle that day. They also betrayed the sacred commandment that says, "Thou shalt not shed innocent blood," the sixth commandment of the 10 commandments. The U.S. Supreme Court on that day decided that the unborn were non-persons. It's interesting, in the same decision, they did not, however, decide when a human being becomes a human being. In fact, if I were to quote from Harry Blackmun, who was the Associate Justice that handed down the majority position in Roe v. Wade, he said this, quote, "We need not decide the difficult question of when life begins." Now, I don't know about you, but if I had the responsibility of deciding whether unborn children would live or not, I think that would be the very issue that we ought to be talking about. But the Supreme Court did not decide or even think about or question when life began, which I think was obviously a mistake. What they did in this decision, however, is decided whether an unborn child was a person or not. So they didn't take up the question of when life begins, but they did decide whether the unborn child was a person or not. Now, obviously, I think, anyway, that those are one and the same. That if you're a human, you're a person. If you're a person, you're a human. But the Supreme Court separated those two issues. And what they did is they violated what we call the separation of powers doctrine. Who here can name for me the 3 branches of government? Raise your hand. Go ahead, Peter Shin. Legislative, right? Judicial, and the executive. What does the executive do? A little civics course here. What does the executive do? Right, the executive branch includes the president, enforces the law, right? What does the legislative do? It makes the law, supposedly. And what does the judicial do? Interprets the law. Well, that all changed, in fact, in 1973, and I would submit to you it actually began to change much earlier than that. But the judicial branch usurped the role of the legislative and became a super legislature. 9 men, unelected judges on the United States Supreme Court, decided for millions of Americans that abortion would now be decriminalized, rather than allowing the political process through the legislative branch, that is our state legislators primarily, to decide this political question. So they usurped the legislative branch and the role of the legislature to make law. Because you cannot find the word abortion in the United States Constitution. It's not there. And the 10th Amendment says that if you can't find it within the Constitution itself, it should be left to the states and the people to decide. So the U.S. Supreme Court should have never gotten involved. But they did. And unfortunately, they decided wrongly here and decided that the word person does not include the unborn. Let me quote from Roe v. Wade. And it says this: the court found at the roots of the right to privacy, they found this in the First Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, the Fifth Amendment, and the penumbras of the Bill of Rights. Now, I ask this everywhere I go, and very few people know what a penumbra is, but does anyone know what a penumbra is? Any ideas? In the back, yes.
Shadows.
As a shadow, a partial shadow, something that exists to a greater or lesser degree. In other words, the U.S. Supreme Court found in the penumbras of the Bill of Rights this so-called right to privacy. In other words, it's not there. They made it up. And the right to privacy, by the way, isn't there. The words don't appear anywhere in the U.S. Constitution or the Bill of Rights. They made that up as well. Now, you could say that the Fourth Amendment protects us in some ways against illegal searches and seizures. Yes, we do have a right to privacy in that respect, but does it go to the extent of protecting a woman and her reproductive rights to abort a pregnancy? I would say not. Prior to 1973, the decision of Griswold versus Connecticut, and this is important to know, in Griswold versus Connecticut, really was the first time that this phrase, the right to privacy, was ever applied to reproductive issues. In fact, it was a case involving a married couple, male and female, a married couple, who at that time, in 1965, believe it or not, in the state of Connecticut, it was against the law to use birth control. And they sued the state of Connecticut and went all the way up to the United States Supreme Court, and in Griswold versus Connecticut, for the first time, the use of birth control was now decriminalized. You could use it legally in the United States, and they rested on this phrase, the right to privacy. And that was used as a precursor for Roe versus Wade. That laid the groundwork for using the same concept, the right to privacy, to extend to a right to a woman to have an abortion. So, this issue of personhood is central to the entire question over abortion, and that has been the debate for the last 36 years. Now, here's a pretty good definition of the word personhood, and it's simply a legal status we either confer upon or withhold from a particular class of human beings. It's the legal status that we either confer upon or withhold from a particular class of human beings. We find the word person in our 14th Amendment, which says, the state shall not deprive a person the right to life, liberty, or property without due process. Okay? So when the U.S. Supreme Court decided that that word person does not apply to the unborn, therefore all the legal protections on the unborn, as they were persons considered prior to 1973, no longer applied. So the word person, according to the U.S. Supreme Court, does not apply to the unborn. So personhood is the legal status. The question of when life began is more of a scientific issue, but not a political issue. Again, I think those are one of the same, and life begins at conception. Now, I wish I could tell you that this was something new, but it isn't. Throughout history, we have, at least humanity has, redefined personhood to exclude those who get in our way or have something we want. So culture, society, governments have redefined this word, this legal status, to exclude those who get in the way or have something we want. And if you look throughout history, and we're going to talk about that in my discussion of social reform as it relates to abortion and the use of graphic images. But we have redefined this word historically, and if we look back simply to our own history here in America, with African Americans, who we redefined the word person basically to exclude them. European Jews did it with, the Nazis did it with European Jews, and on and on. So that is why we believe abortion fits the definition of genocide, which is simply the deliberate and systematic destruction of a national, racial, religious, political, cultural, ethnic, or other group defined by the exterminators as undesirable. Because we've redefined this word to exclude those who get in the way or have something we want, abortion fits this definition of genocide. Is it deliberate? Obviously. Is there a system? No question about it. In America, we have over 1,000 abortion centers that systematically destroy 3,200 unborn children every day, funded by tax dollars currently in 17 states. Now, where we get hung up with those who don't agree with us, they'll say, well, it doesn't fit the traditional definition, which we would agree. However, there's a lot of things that don't fit the typical or historical definition of genocide, but are still genocide. And we're going to talk about that later in our talk about the Genocide Awareness Project. But the point here is that there is another group. Can anyone define that group? By age is one, and Stephanie's going to talk about that. But also there's another class or a way that we can define the group, the unborn, that they are systematically and deliberately being destroyed. And what is it? What's that? Disabled? How about unwanted? Simply unwanted. Unwanted unborn children are the ones that are systematically being destroyed. Margaret Sanger, in her, when she wrote about this whole question and came up with the phrase that every child should be a wanted child. Now, I don't know about you, but who can disagree with that? Every child should be a wanted child. The question is, what do you do with the unwanted ones? And Planned Parenthood says that you should destroy them by abortion. So she really defined the victim class quite well when she said every child should be a wanted child. Now, when I said that this word person has been redefined to exclude those who get in the way or have something we want, in 1973, when it was handed down in Roe v. Wade, what did women want? And why did we redefine the word person to exclude them? And what do they want now? Why do they choose abortion? Answer? Anybody got an idea? There's several. Freedom, personal freedom, sexual freedom, whatever. We're coming out of the years of sexual liberation in the 1960s. What else? Just they get in the way of what? Our own personal pursuits. I want to go to college. I don't want to get married right now. I don't want to be a parent. I don't want to raise this child. I'm a victim of rape, etc., etc. They get in the way, right? But they also have something we want now. And this is fairly new in the whole abortion debate. Of the last 15 or so years, you've seen this now become more prevalent. What does the culture want from the unborn? What? Stem cells, no question. And before that, it was fetal tissue. These things haven't changed. So now we've added an additional layer of reasons, at least culturally, as to why we continue to keep the unborn from having legal protection. So, I mean, that's a very short synopsis of American abortion law and what happened in Roe v. Wade and where we are now. The truth of the matter is not much has changed in 36 years. Roe v. Wade still is the, quote, law of the land. And abortion is still legal through all 9 months of pregnancy for any reason. So we haven't made a whole lot of progress, but legislatively that is.